the last couple of weeks and the bit before, I've put on £3. I didn't all the way through. So I'm going into Christmas fat. So I'm going to be a fat little fucker. Anyway, it started well, didn't it?
You appear to have gone into some form of grief about the downfall of this ruthless, vile dictator. Why?
Well, when you say I spent time with Bashar al-Assad, you might have added that I spent time with him in Buckingham Palace when he was a guest of Her Majesty the Queen, literally living in the spare room at Buckingham Palace. The night before, going down the Mall in an open-top coach with Her Majesty on a royal trot around central London. You might have mentioned that Tony Blair suggested a knighthood for Bashar al-Assad. I've met him once, twice in my life, and the second time, not on my own. So grief, no, my grief is for Syria. My grief is for the Syrian people, who are now ruled by ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And if you were being honest with yourself, knowing what you do about ISIS and Al-Qaeda, you'd be grieving with me.
We each live our lives. The goal of each individual, I suppose, is to be as happy as you can be without hurting anyone else, without infringing on other people's rights. And there's probably a list of things that make each person happy. Mine is dogs, wine, this, talking absolute shit for a living, creating. What else? You know, all the usual things, friends and family and all that. Work, learning. People always forget that. I always forget it, but it's great just finding stuff out. So anyway, everyone has a list of things that makes them happy, and you just got to do that all your life and then die, and probably leave the world in as good a state as you found it if you can. That's just common courtesy, isn't it? If you borrowed someone's caravan for the weekend and threw up everywhere, pissed on the carpet, shut the bed, you'd clean up, wouldn't you? Saturday morning. Just common courtesy. Little tip there.
Well, I certainly think there are a lot of concerns, legitimate concerns, about the leader of the rebels, who clearly was running part of Al-Qaeda in Syria. That's unquestionable. He says he's a changed person. He's distanced himself from, as he puts it, the extremists. I think we have to wait and see how this plays out and see if he is true to his word. Certainly the Americans seem to be buying into that at the moment, are supporting him, as are many other countries. In this country, for example, in the UK, I've seen that the government is saying we may have to unprescribe the group that he represents as a terror group in light of what's happened. So there's a lot going on here. And clearly there are a lot of groups in Syria, and there's a lot of people who are claiming they have gone from extreme fundamentalism to more moderate positions. Let's wait and see. It has been known to happen. I would say to you, though, I'm not talking really about what happened with Assad when he first came to power, because he was all the things that you rightly articulated. I just find it odd that you would view his dismissal now as a bad thing for Syrians. And we made a quick checklist here. This is a guy, I remember I was at CNN at the time with the 2011 Arab Spring. He crushed the peaceful resistance. It led to a devastating civil war, at least 300,000, maybe 500,000 deaths. More than 14 million Syrians had to flee their homes. He fired rockets filled with sarin gas on Ghouta, killing nearly 1,500, mostly women and children. Continued to use chlorine and sarin on his own people between 2014 to 2018. Russian and Syrian government airstrikes killed more than 100,000 Syrians since 2011. Thousands tortured and left to rot in prisons. The prisons are currently being emptied out. People have been kept there, right, in underground, horrific conditions for sometimes decades under this guy. And And so whatever the argument, which is a legitimate one, as I say, about what may come next, and we've seen with Libya and with Iraq and even with Iran, sometimes be careful what you wish for, and I'm absolutely cognizant of that. And I'm not getting too excited until I see how this plays out in terms of the leadership. But you cannot defend Assad's record of how he has treated his own people, given the scale of death, destruction, wrongful imprisonment, torture, and so on. Can you?
Well, that's the kind of propaganda porn that you've just adumbrated, that we were treated to about Saddam Hussein to justify invading and occupying Iraq. Both you and me, to our eternal credit, saw through that because we refused to abstract. Even if 1/5 of what you just said there is the case, that is not a justification for making every matter worse. Now, it's true that Paul had a dramatic conversion on the road to Damascus, but we know al-Golani. He wasn't just the number 2 to Zarqawi in Iraq. He was the Al-Qaeda number 2 in Iraq, killing British soldiers, by the way, killing American soldiers, by the way. And then he went to Syria and became the number 2 to al-Baghdadi, the founder of ISIS in Syria. So that would knock Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus into a cocked hat. Now, like you, I'm waiting for developments. Like you, I'm ready to treat this on its merits. If the Christian priests are not massacred, if the nuns are not kidnapped, if the religious minorities and Kurdish minorities and Druze minorities are not hunted down, like Golani did just 7 years ago, well, nobody will be happier than me. But you used the words, be careful what you wish for. In the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus yesterday, his supporters were chanting that they're on their way to Jerusalem next. And after Jerusalem, they're on their way to Mecca next. Now, I could live with that, Piers. I'm not sure that you could.
Listen, I'm not trying to make a defense of any of it at the moment. I think it's a very turbulent situation. As you know, I've got relatives, including my brother, who've been in the military, and you can make a very good argument that when you depose dictators, it often leads to a worse situation. I mean, I think that's inarguable. And I'm not saying for a moment that I have absolute confidence that won't happen here, but I certainly wouldn't let that stray into a defense of Assad, who I think is indisputably proven himself to be an evil dictator.
Well, you can't, can you? I mean, you can't. I mean, it's so subjective, isn't it? And today there's no such thing as mental. Everyone's got an excuse. Everything's a fucking, you know what I mean? It used to be he's mental, but now, no, he's not. So I think it would be them to prove I was mental. What would I do? Just have a sort of dignified conversation. Like that. I go, well, sorry about the inconvenience. There's been a misunderstanding. I do the test, right? And I go, yeah. And I go, well, yeah, you're saying. And then as they would leave, I go, oh, they say, well, listen, I'll put in the recommendation. You'll leave. I go, as they're leaving, I go, can I eat your feet? And they go, oh, fucking hell. Oh.
Let me ask you, there's a lot going on in the world right now, not least in the Middle East. You've seen Israel clearly have military success now, both against Hamas and Hezbollah, which seems to have given them a resurgent popularity. Netanyahu was very unpopular, is now much more popular because these people support what he's been doing with what they perceive to be terrorism. Iran, I would argue, is indisputably been weakened, not just by that, by also what's happened with al-Assad. You could argue that Russia has also been weakened because they basically pulled out of Syria completely. They've got a lot of troops there, but they're trying to get out of there completely. What do you make of the whole situation in totality? Donald Trump's coming in. He's made it clear he wants to end the war in Ukraine. He wants to try and end the wars in the Middle East. But where are we going to be left out of all this in a few months, do you think?
Well, unfortunately, for the purposes of show business, I agreed with all of that you just said. The truth is that the big winners in this are Erdogan, the new Ottoman emperor, whose flag is flying on the citadel in Aleppo for the first time since Lawrence of Arabia and the Syrian Arab national movement drove the Ottomans out in the First World War, and Netanyahu, who looked dead and buried only 15 months ago.
Yeah.
He looked like he was headed for the pokey. And now he's the cock of the walk. And frankly, the Arabs are lying prone on the floor. And only his tender mercies are anything or everything that stands in the way of him doing to them as he pleases. And he's now invading Syria. He's expanding the Israeli so-called buffer zone, occupation zone on Syrian territory. He's cleaned half of the Gaza Strip entirely of its Palestinian population, the north of Gaza. He could right now, tonight, open the gates of Rafah and drive the remaining Palestinians into the desert in Egypt, and nobody, literally nobody, is going to stop him.
And he's got a president coming in who is completely on his side.
Well, we'll see about that. Depends which Donald Trump you meet. If it's the Donald Trump that was campaigning in Michigan on the eve of poll before his greatest comeback since George Foreman's rumble in the jungle, that Donald Trump wants to end the wars. That Donald Trump might be the one, counterintuitively, I'll grant you, who forces Netanyahu to have some mercy and to try and bring about an end to this suppurating conflict that has poisoned world affairs for basically all of my life.
I think Trump, I actually agree with you. I agree with you. I think Trump, I spoke to him last week and it came up about Middle East and Ukraine and Russia. He is instinctively, he's anti-war. Always has been. Apart from anything else, as a business guy, he just thinks war is bad for business. It costs an awful lot of money. It puts enormous strain on the economy. And what do you gain? I mean, his argument, I think, would be, actually, if you look at America's wars and interventions over the last 50 years, where could you see a clear victory which justified all the money and all the bloodshed and everything else? And I would agree with him. So I do think he can be surprising. I also think there's a will to get peace now, certainly with the Israel-Hamas war, and I think also with Ukraine-Russia. You can see the rhetoric from Zelensky that he is clearly now ready to do some kind of deal because they're both losing too many people. I mean, Russia's losing 2,000 soldiers a day. That's why they've got the North Koreans coming in.
If you were immortal for one day, what would you do? Right, so, okay, I know what you mean. So I can't die, whatever I do that day, like Groundhog Day. I can do what I want, and I can't. But then, at midnight, I'm mortal again. I've got to be careful. Well, I suppose I would do dangerous things. Would I do things? Would I go into war zones and sort people out because they couldn't kill me? Or would I just fuck about? Just jump off buildings to get to annoy tourists? Hold on though. Right, I'm immortal, but I've seen these things like the monkey's paw and 3 wishes go wrong when there's a twist in the tale. So I jump off a building for a laugh and I crunch and I'm not dead, but I'm smashed to pieces and in agony. And I'm going, ah. And then you go, yeah, I didn't say you. Ah. So I'm absolutely fucked. And then I just die of my injuries the next day. you gotta be careful with these questions. What would I do? I don't know. What would I do? Maybe I would do things that other people couldn't do. But what's that though? And you only got one day. What's the point? Running around bouncing off cars for a laugh. Good question though, that, isn't it? Some people have really got to thought that out. Like, I know what I'd do. Wade into poachers. Just go like they wouldn't know what I did, would they?